Hey guys, tonight we begin with a quiet contradiction that still unsettles historians. The pyramids, despite their immense weight and impossible scale, were built not by faceless slaves, but by organized, skilled workers who left behind bakeries, medical stations, and even little notes of boredom carved into stone. And yet, for all this evidence, the precise method of lifting millions of tons into perfect alignment remains an open, softly whispering mystery on the desert wind. Warm air rises over the Giza plateau, carrying the scent of dust, rush mats, and the faint sweetness of early bread ovens. Stone blocks glow in the first pale light, shadows stretch long and thin across the rising monument, as if the morning itself walks slowly, carefully, among the builders. It is a world of heat, grit, aching hands, and unending labor, a place where most modern people, with our soft routines and comfortable beds, likely wouldn't survive a single afternoon under the desert sun. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're awake enough, leave a quiet comment telling me your location and the local time where you're listening. It's always calming to imagine the small constellation of sleepy listeners across the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Dawn approaches the Giza plateau with a kind of slow restraint, as though the sun itself hesitates before committing to another day of heat and labor. The first light does not arrive in a blaze. It seeps gently over the dunes, brushing the ground with pale gold. During these few fragile moments, the desert is almost cool. The sand holds the night's breath, and the air carries a faint, chalky stillness that settles softly on the skin. Dust drifts upward in thin spirals, suspended in the quiet like tiny grains caught between sleep and waking. In the labor camp, workers rise from their reed mats with practiced motions. The mats crackle softly beneath them, shedding little avalanches of sand with every shift. No matter how tightly they roll them at night, the desert always finds a way inside. One worker brushes off a handful of sand and mutters that the dunes must wander around while everyone sleeps, loaning their grains to any bed left unwatched. Another worker, still blinking against the dawn, murmurs that perhaps the sand simply enjoys their company. Their voices are low, shaped by the hush of the hour. The camp spreads out in neat rows, reed shelters, mud brick structures, long lean-tos that offer narrow slices of shade later in the day. Morning smoke curls from the central fire pit, carrying the warm, earthy scent of barley bread reheated over embers. Near the ovens, cooks shuffle quietly, adjusting clay lids and shifting baskets of dough. A lesser-known detail flickers here. Archaeologists later identify traces of dried dates mixed into some workmen's loaves, a small sweetness tucked into the monotony of daily rations. The workers never treat it as special. They simply eat what the bakers provide, accepting both the sourness and the rare hints of sweetness without ceremony. The plateau itself lies still. Its limestone surface is dim and colorless before the sun brightens them. The unfinished pyramid rises like a giant staircase, sharp-edged and geometric in the fading shadow. It is not yet a monument, but it already commands the horizon. Even half-built, it looks immovable, ancient, as though carved from the desert long before the workers ever arrived. But they know better. They know the weight of each stone, the ache in their muscles that climbs in waves from shoulder to spine, the constant wrestling with blocks that resist movement as though they have personal grievances. Water carriers approach the communal jars, lifting cool water in cupped hands to splash their faces. The cold bite wakes them more effectively than any overseer. Some gasp quietly, others rub their arms to coax warmth back into their limbs. For this short window of morning, the water is a blessing. Soon, once the sun takes hold, the jars will warm, and every drink will taste like liquid heat. Animal pens stir along the camp's edge. Donkeys bray with their usual morning indignation, as if personally offended by the existence of work. One particularly expressive donkey lets out a groan so dramatic that two workers glance over and smother tired smiles. Oxen shift their weight, stamping their broad hooves against the ground, sending soft thuds through the packed sand. Their bodies radiate warmth even now, long before the sun begins its assault. A bell-like clack cuts through the gentle noise, wooden staves tapping together in regular intervals. An overseer moves through the camp, marking the beginning of the day. His linen tunic hangs loosely, dust already collecting at the hem even though the day has barely started. He unfurls a cord marked with knots spaced at measured intervals, one of the simple tools used to impose order on thousands of hands and millions of stones. The knots represent distances, alignments, angles. These cords, alongside plumb lines and the steady observation of shadows, help the workers achieve the astonishing precision that still baffles visitors thousands of years later. Groups form near the bread tables. Workers accept round loaves of barley bread and clay cups of thick beer. The beer is not a luxury. It is breakfast, hydration, and energy woven together. One man peers into his cup, squints, and quietly suggests that the brew today is so thick it may require chewing. A friend beside him, already sipping his portion, shrugs and murmurs that at least chewing would make it last longer. Their soft humor ripples through the line in gentle waves. After eating, the workers gather ropes, chisels, mallets, and bundles of linen strips. A few pause to tighten the cloth wrapped around their heads, ensuring it will catch the sweat that later drips in slow, relentless beads. The desert sun does not merely warm, it presses, it flattens. It turns skin into a battlefield between heat and endurance. Even the tools feel it, chisels warming so quickly by noon that workers sometimes bandage them with cloth to avoid burning their fingers. At the edge of the camp, the healer prepares his small hut, arranging jars of honey salve, herbs, and strips of clean linen. Honey, prized for its antibacterial properties, glows softly inside its clay container. Another jar sits beside it, filled with a dark, resinous paste that later scholars debate. Some say cedar oil, others suggest a mixture of fat and crushed herbs used for deeper wounds. The healer checks each jar, ensuring the lids are sealed tight before the flies wake. A widely accepted historical detail moves quietly through this hour. The workers on the pyramids were not enslaved masses, but skilled laborers organized in rotating teams. Some lived here permanently with families, others arrived seasonally, contributing labor as part of a tax-like obligation. Carved marks found on stones, team names, jokes, small declarations of pride, still echo this truth. The workers gather near the quarry path. The rising light touches the edges of the pyramid and transforms the limestone into a soft glow. The air warms slowly, like a deep breath, filling the chest of the landscape. Ropes coil across shoulders, sandals crunch against the compacted ground. The sounds blend into a rhythmic murmur that signals the transition from waking to working. Beside the path, a worker adjusts a rope loop and mutters that the day already feels heavier than the stone they will drag. Another replies that at least the stones do not talk back, a quiet comfort in a place where even the air argues. They share a breath of weary amusement as they set out toward the quarry. Dust swirls around their feet. A thin breeze brushes the surface of the plateau, carrying scents of bread crust, dampened sand, warmed linen, and the faint mineral sharpness of cut stone waiting ahead. The sun rises higher, brightening the sky into a soft yellow that will soon become a harsh, unforgiving white. Shadows shorten, tools glint, the pyramid's silhouette sharpens, and so the day begins, slow, quiet, steady, with thousands of workers stepping into the ancient rhythm that will, piece by piece, lift stone into eternity. Morning settles fully across the labor camp with a slow, deliberate stillness, as though the desert itself pauses to study the people waking beneath its widening light. The last shadows of night cling stubbornly to the edges of mud brick walls before retreating across the ground in long, reluctant bands. Soft dust rises from every footstep, drifting in a lazy, suspended haze that catches the sun's first steady warmth. Workers begin to gather in the open courtyard where the day always starts. Their movements are unhurried, shaped by routine and the knowledge that the desert rewards steadiness more than speed. Linen kilts sway softly as they walk, reed mats, rolled and stacked carefully, lean against wooden posts. The crackling sounds of bread ovens blend with the faint murmurs of morning voices. Everything in the camp wakes slowly, not because of sleepiness, but because the day ahead demands conservation. Long wooden tables stretch across the yard, each covered with clay bowls, round loaves, and baskets of small onions. The bread is simple, dense barley rounds baked the previous evening, left to rest overnight, so their warmth would survive until morning. Workers line up beside the tables, accepting their rations with a kind of quiet ceremony. A round loaf is pressed into each hand, followed by a cup of thick, cloudy beer, nourishing, heavy, and faintly sour. One man peers into his cup and mutters that it appears more solid than liquid today. Another suggests in a calm whisper that chewing one drink is simply the mark of a refined palate. The soft humour drifts across the line, barely lifting the stillness of dawn. Near the centre ovens, bakers lift clay lids, releasing warm air scented with grain and smoke. Pots of beans simmer in low hearths. The cooks move with silent efficiency, their faces already shiny from the heat, though the sun has only begun its ascent. A lesser-known detail lingers here. Some loaves are brushed with a thin glaze of fermented date mash before baking, giving them a faint sweetness. It is not a luxury, simply a quirk of the camp's supply cycles, but the workers sometimes notice the difference and accept it with quiet appreciation. The camp's organization reveals itself gently. Alleys between the structures swept clean, rows of shelter frames tied with woven mats, pottery jars arranged neatly beside water troughs. This is not the chaotic sprawl imagined by distant myths. It is closer to a small, purposeful town. Families of permanent laborers live here, their children stepping quietly around adults as they carry small basket tasks, gathering rushes, fetching water ladles, fetching handfuls of clay for the bakeries. The healer opens his mud brick hut, stacking his linen bandages in a neat arrangement beside jars of honey salve and fresh herbs. His tools are simple, a smooth obsidian flake for cleaning cuts, bundles of reeds for splints, but arranged with deliberate care. Honey glows amber inside its jar, thick and translucent. Next to it sits a smaller jar of mysterious, resinous paste that leaves scholars to argue quietly across centuries. Was it cedar resin, perhaps oil and herb mixture? The aroma is sharp, earthy, and slightly sweet. The healer tests the lid with a gentle press, ensuring it remains sealed from insects. A widely accepted truth threads through the camp as steadily as the morning breeze. The workers are not shackled or starved. They are fed well enough to endure intense physical labor, supported by bakers, brewers, healers, water carriers, cooks, and toolmakers. Many rotate in and out of service, but some remain year-round as skilled professionals, a quiet workforce that keeps the great project breathing. The soundscape of morning grows thicker. Chisels are tested against sandstone blocks, used for sharpening. The soft scraping creates a steady, whispering rhythm. Workers lift their tools, examining edges, adjusting wooden mallets bound with rawhide strips. Ropes are tightened, checked for fraying. Linen headcloths are wrapped and knotted carefully to catch sweat long before it reaches the eyes. At the animal pens, donkeys flick their ears with theatrical irritation. One brays with such exasperation that to nearby workers exchange resigned glances. Oxen chew thoughtfully, eyelashes blinking slowly in the rising light, as if contemplating the nature of labor itself. A worker brushes an ox's flank with methodical strokes, murmuring softly to it. The ox, entirely uninterested, leans heavily into the brush, almost knocking the man aside. He steadies himself, shoots the animal a glance, and remarks quietly that at least someone in this camp gets to choose how fast they move. Across the courtyard, overseers begin unfurling long cords, knotted at precise intervals. They inspect each knot with care, ensuring that nothing has stretched or shifted overnight. A plumb line hangs from one of them, its stone weight polished smooth from years of use. These are the tools that maintain order, simple, reliable, unchanging. The overseers move their fingers along the cord, measuring distances by touch, satisfying themselves that the knots still represent exact lengths. Even the angle of the sun at this hour becomes part of their calculations. Workers gather in work groups, sorting themselves naturally into teams who have labored side by side countless times before. They adjust their belts, retie rope coils, and exchange slow knots. The camp hums with anticipation, not excitement but readiness. Everyone knows the rhythm of the day: heat rising, stone dragging, sweat beading, tools dulling, sand shifting underfoot. Near one mud brick wall, a group of men load jars of beer onto a carrying pole. Their movements are slow, deliberate, designed to keep the jars from clinking. One worker wipes a smear of flour from his arm and remarks that if the jars break, the entire pyramid will certainly collapse from disappointment. His companion raises an eyebrow and replies softly that the sun is the only thing with authority here, and even it seems too lazy in the mornings to enforce such punishments. Their quiet banter dissipates into the warming air. A question that historians still study hovers faintly around the edges of this morning. Exactly how many workers lived here at one time? Estimates shift between thousands and tens of thousands. The camp holds its answer silently, leaving scholars to read traces in ash pits, bread molds, and animal bones. For the workers themselves, the number is irrelevant. They only know the rows of faces around them, the hands that pull ropes beside theirs, the breaths that rise and fall in unison when the day grows hot. Water carriers begin their first rounds, lifting heavy jars and pouring cool water into troughs or onto the sand. The water darkens the ground into a rich, deep brown. Its fragrance is earthy and clean. Workers step into the damp patches with a small sigh, the soil briefly soft beneath their sandals. The desert, in this moment, feels almost kind. The sun climbs further, casting longer rays across the pyramid. Its unfinished sides glow faintly, reflecting muted gold into the morning air. Shadows shorten along the camp's edges. Linen begins to warm against skin. Tools grow heavier in the hands, though their weight never changes. One worker ties a rope coil more tightly around his waist and mutters that the day already feels heavier than the stones waiting to be moved. His companion, wrapping linen around his forehead, replies calmly that at least the stones do not complain, a luxury not granted to human bodies. Their soft humour lingers between them, a little refuge in the widening brightness. As the overseers raise their clappers, the camp shifts into action. Workers finish their bread, drain the last mouthfuls of beer, and rise with slow, practiced motions. Ropes are gathered, tools are checked one final time. Children step aside as teams form lines, leading toward the quarry path. The day begins its long stretch forward. Dust rises like breath from the earth, swirling briefly before settling. The workers, thousands of steady footsteps, move toward the stone that waits for them, their lives intertwined with its weight, their rhythms bound to the ancient geometry ending slowly under the widening sun. The path to the quarry stretches across the plateau in a pale, dusty ribbon, curving gently between low ridges of limestone. As the workers approach, the morning light sinks deeper into the folds of the land, revealing the jagged edges of the quarry face ahead, a broad wound carved into the desert, glowing softly beneath the strengthening sun. Dust clouds hover in slow motion, rising whenever the wind stirs, then settling again, as though lulled by the rhythm of labor that has shaped this place for decades. The atmosphere shifts subtly when the workers step inside the quarry. The air grows still, held captive by the high walls on either side. What little breeze reached them on the plateau now fades into silence, replaced by the mineral scent of limestone, dry, chalky, and faintly metallic. The ground underfoot crunches with the brittle remains of old chips, each step stirring thin wisps of pale dust that drift upward like thin smoke. Teams spread out along the quarry floor, each heading to the marked sections assigned the previous evening. Rough red ochre symbols stain the cliff face in straight, purposeful lines. These markings are instructions: where to cut, how deep to strike, which blocks will rise today toward the growing monument. Workers trace the lines with their fingers in habitual gestures, as if greeting an old companion before beginning the dialogue of stone and tool. Copper chisels gleam faintly in the soft light. Wooden mallets, smooth from years of handling, rest beside them. Sandstone sharpening blocks sit in neat piles, ready to restore the edges that will dull again and again. The quarry is a place where nothing remains sharp for long. Copper bends and bruises under the pressure. The stone resists with stubborn patience. A widely accepted detail rests quietly inside this struggle. The builders relied not on complex metals, but on simple copper tools, their effectiveness sustained only through constant sharpening. The first strikes of the day echo through the quarry like slow, deliberate heartbeats. Tap, tap, pause, tap. The sound travels upward along the walls, softened by the narrow space, until it blurs into one continuous metallic murmur. Workers lean close to the stone, listening to its faint, gritty replies. A good block will vibrate in a certain way, a subtle shiver felt through the hands. A bad block will ring dull, signaling hidden fractures. The workers read these vibrations the way others might read lines on a scroll. A man kneels beside a marked line and begins carving a shallow groove. Dust gathers along the growing channel, sprinkling his forearms and settling into the creases of his linen wrap. He wipes the dust with a slow movement, then continues his work. Beside him, another worker sharpens his chisel with a small bowl of sand, rubbing the edge in firm, circular strokes until it begins to shine again. He examines it carefully, squints, and sighs. Copper never agrees to stay sharp for as long as one hopes. He mutters under his breath that copper must be the laziest metal ever forged. His companion snorts softly and says the stone is far worse. At least copper pretends to cooperate. The workers continue in steady rhythms. Wooden wedges are hammered into deep grooves along the block's edge. Barely audible cracks travel through the stone as the wedges grip the limestone. Water carriers arrive and pour water onto the wedges, soaking them until they swell. The wood expands with slow determination, pressing against the stone from within. A quiet tension builds in the air. Then, a soft, satisfying sigh. The block splits from the cliff face, separating along the groove like a giant exhaling its breath. No dramatic shatter, no violent break, just the calm inevitability of ancient technique meeting natural force. A lesser-known detail lies in the way water carriers move through the quarry. Each jar they carry is wrapped with damp cloth to keep the water cooler for longer. It is a small, clever trick against the desert heat. The cloth darkens from moisture, releasing a faint, earthy scent that drifts behind them. As they pass, workers lift the jars briefly, taking small sips. Even at this hour, the water warms quickly in the sun. The newly freed block rests on the ground, pale and powdery around the edges. Workers gather around it with ropes coiled loosely over their shoulders. They calculate its weight with their eyes, a simple judgment honed by years of experience. One man taps the block gently with his mallet, listening for hidden flaws. He nods, satisfied. Another squints and remarks that the block looks heavier than its cousins, perhaps having eaten extra dust overnight. His teammate replies softly that at least it didn't eat their rations. Their quiet exchange drifts away like a small puff of amusement. Ropes are looped securely around the block. Sand is poured across the ground in a thick, even layer. Then water is brought again, splashed in a long arc over the sand until it darkens and gains a slippery sheen. A widely noted detail lies in this ritual. Damp sand reduces friction significantly, making it far easier for workers to pull heavy blocks without tearing the tracks apart or exhausting themselves before noon. They lean into the ropes, sandals digging into the damp ground. Their bodies tilt forward in perfect unison. The block resists for a moment, then shifts with a faint groan, Inch by inch, it begins to move. The sound of its passage is a soft scrape, almost soothing in its consistency. Dust rises in slow spirals. The workers breathe in steady patterns, exhaling through their noses to keep dust from filling their mouths. Above the quarry, the sun climbs higher, warming the limestone walls until they glow like pale embers. Shadows shorten, the air thickens, sweat beads along the workers' foreheads. Linen wraps grow darker with moisture. The heat begins to press downward, flattening sound and slowing movements. Still, the pace remains steady. As the block reaches the lower end of the ramp, the workers pause for a short breath. Water carriers offer drinks. A few men stretch their backs in small, careful motions. One remarks quietly that the sun is already behaving like an impatient overseer, eager to punish anyone who lingers. Another murmurs that the sun may be harsh, but at least it does not carry a stick. Their soft jokes, spoken almost without inflection, soften the edge of fatigue. A question historians still debate lingers quietly within the labor. How exactly were the larger blocks extracted? Evidence points to wedge and water techniques, but some scholars suggest additional methods: fire setting, pounding stones, or early lever systems. The quarry holds its secrets gently, resisting firm conclusions, much like the stone itself resists the first blows of the day. The workers resume their pull, guiding the block toward the top of the ramp. The incline is steep in places, requiring careful footing. Their sandals scrape softly against the dampened sand. At the summit, the desert breeze finally returns, lifting the heat from their shoulders for a brief, merciful moment. The workers straighten, catching slow breaths. The block rests at their feet, silent, massive, obedient. The plateau stretches wide before them, bathed in expanding morning light. The pyramid rises in the distance, a step silhouette, half complete, waiting for this block and countless others. Dust, sunlight, sweat, stone, all merge into the quiet hum of the day. The block has left the quarry behind, and with it, the workers prepare to leave as well, stepping into the long path that leads toward the rising monument. The path from the quarry to the construction site stretches out across the plateau in a long, pale line, worn smooth by the steady grind of sledges and thousands of footsteps. Morning light spills across it in muted gold, turning the sand into a shifting tapestry of warm tones. Dust rises gently from every movement, from sandals scuffing the ground, from ropes dragging, from sledges murmuring their way forward. This is the moment when movement is possible without strain becoming punishment. The ropes creak softly, vibrating with tension. Dozens of hands grip them, each pair contributing to the slow, deliberate drag. The workers do not shout. They move in measured silence, guided by rhythm rather than noise. Water carriers walk ahead, splashing long arcs of water onto the sand. The droplets darken the ground instantly, releasing a faint, cool scent before vanishing into the heat. This small ritual, repeated endlessly through the day, transforms dry, stubborn sand into a smooth track. A widely documented detail hums gently beneath this act. Watered sand reduces friction so effectively that a single team can drag stones far heavier than might seem possible. The workers proceed at a steady pace, their sandals sinking slightly into the softened ground. The sledge glides behind them, leaving a damp, dark line in its wake. A few men lean harder into their ropes, adjusting their positions when the sand thickens. One worker lifts his head and mutters softly that the block seems unwilling today, as though offended by being woken so early. Another worker suggests, in the same gentle tone, that the block simply wishes to take in the scenery. Their humor is soft, almost sleepy, blending into the low hum of labor. As the procession moves forward, the camp falls behind and the horizon opens. The desert stretches outward in long, indifferent waves. Small clusters of shrubs cling to patches of dry soil, their leaves pale and curled like parchment. The wind brushes across them, carrying a faint whisper of grit. In the distance, a few ibises lift lazily from a shallow pool left by last night's irrigation channel, their wings catching the sunlight in white, slow arcs. The worker's path rises gradually, leading toward the long causeway that carries stones from the quarry onto the pyramid's base. The causeway is wide, a sloping ramp built from compacted debris, limestone chips, and mud brick. Its surface is firm underfoot. Shadows from its low retaining walls stretch across the sand in narrow stripes that shift with every passing minute. The causeway is as essential as the stones themselves, a quiet artery that feeds the monument. As they approach the incline, overseers step closer, offering hand signals and low whistles. Their linen tunics sway in the breeze. One holds a knotted measuring cord, as though even in this moment of raw force he cannot help but think of alignment and distance. Overseers seldom raise their voices. The workers know their routines too well. The signals are subtle, a raised hand, a small nod, a silent gesture to slow or adjust. The sledge reaches the incline and pauses. The workers reposition themselves, dividing into teams along the sides and front. Ropes are tightened. Sand is watered again, forming dark streaks that glisten faintly under the sun. The air here is warmer, reflecting upward from the ramp surface. Heat radiates from the stones lining the walls, carrying the scent of baked minerals. They begin the ascent. The block moves with a soft scraping sound that blends into the wind. The men bend forward, foot by foot, pulling with deep, silent focus. Muscles shift beneath linen wraps, steady and controlled. Sweat forms early along their brows, and droplets trace thin paths down their temples. A water carrier walks beside them, offering small mouthfuls from a clay jar when hands are free to accept it. The causeway is long, the incline is modest but constant. The heat grows thicker with each step. Shadows retreat from the ramp, leaving the workers exposed to widening sun. Linen headcloths darken with moisture. A few men breathe more heavily, but none breaks the rhythm. They have climbed this path countless times. The body remembers what the mind does not need to think about. A question that historians still debate lingers softly at the edges of this journey. What form did the builders ultimately use for the final stages of lifting? Straight ramps, like this one, spiraling ramps around the pyramid's face. Internal corridors hidden within its core. The evidence is scattered. Fragments of pathways, dust-laden ledges, vague markings in stone. The truth remains a quiet companion to the workers' labor, unresolved even as the stones rise. Midway up the causeway, a brief rest is granted. The workers set down their ropes, letting the sledge settle into the damp earth. A few sit on low blocks, lining the path, their breaths slow and measured. One man rolls his shoulders and remarks, almost affectionately, that the stone behaves like a stubborn child, cooperative only when watched closely. Another agrees, adding calmly that the stone probably knows it will live longer than all of them. Their soft jokes ripple through the pores, easing the tightening of muscles. The rest is short. The sun demands movement before heat worsens. They lift the ropes again. The sledge shifts forward, dust rises in tiny clouds. The final stretch of the ramp narrows slightly, directing the block toward the construction zone, where other stones wait in orderly rows. The sound changes subtly here. Instead of the soft whisper of sand, there is a duller, heavier scrape as the sledge reaches the prepared ground near the pyramid. The workers step onto firmer terrain. The shadow of the unfinished monument lays over them, cool in comparison to the open plateau. The air here feels different, quieter, though alive with distant sounds of chisels shaping casing stones and the low hum of teams adjusting blocks already placed. The block is guided into position near the base. Workers coil the ropes, dusting their hands as they do. A few kneel beside the stone, checking its edges. Marks made in the quarry are still visible, guiding where the block will eventually be trimmed or rotated. It rests here not permanently, but for the moment, a quiet giant among many. One worker sits briefly on a nearby stone and shakes sand from his sandals. He mutters that the causeway grows steeper every day. Another replies, without looking up, that it is not the causeway growing, it is simply the workers shrinking. Their calm amusement blends with the warm air, dissipating like breath in sunlight. The journey is complete, but the day is long from over. More blocks wait in the quarry. More tracks must be watered, more ropes must be pulled. The causeway will feel each scrape of wood and stone, each soft footstep, each whispered joke. And above it all, the pyramid rises slowly, one block at a time, shaped by thousands of hands moving across this sunlit path. The long causeway stretches toward the construction site like a pale artery across the plateau, carrying stone, sweat, and breath toward the rising monument. As the workers reach its upper end, the landscape shifts around them. The flat desert gives way to an organized expanse of ramps, pathways, marker stones, and low scaffolding frames made from bundled wood. Dust hangs gently in the air, shimmering in the deepening morning light. The pyramid looms before them, not as a symmetrical shape yet, but as a massive, stepped mountain of stone, alive with movement. The upper platform hums quietly with coordinated labor. Teams of workers shift stones, adjust lever arms, hammer wooden wedges, and sprinkle water across tracks. The soundscape here is layered and patient. The clack of wooden mallets, the deep thud of blocks settling, the faint metallic notes of copper chisels meeting limestone. Even the wind seems to soften itself, as if not to disturb the rhythm. The block brought from the quarry now rests on a shaded section beside the base. It will not remain here long. Each stone follows a path shaped by its size, its purpose, and the red ochre marks that identify its future home. This block belongs to one of the mid-level courses. Workers consult the markings, trace the lines with their fingers, and adjust their ropes once more. Near the rising structure, a team sprays water along a short ramp that climbs to the next level. The ramp, built of compacted debris and coated with fine sand, curves gently upward. Shadows cling to its base, but melt quickly higher up, swallowed by the sun's widening reach. The ramp is surprisingly narrow, shaped for careful movement rather than speed. Its edges are guarded by low rows of limestone chips, meant to keep sledges from slipping sideways. Historians agree the builders used ramps of some kind, straight, zigzagged, or spiraling, but no one fully agrees which type dominated. The evidence lies scattered across ledges and collapsed walls. The workers here do not ponder such questions. The ramp they climb each day is simply the correct one, because it exists, and because it works. The team positions themselves at the base of the ramp. They dampen the sand once more, forming a smooth strip that glistens faintly. The sledge is angled carefully. The workers lean in and begin pulling. Their movements are slow and synchronized, bodies tilting forward, sandals pressing into damp grit. The block glides up the ramp at a steady pace, pushed and guided from behind by a second team, who brace their hands against its lower edge. Heat thickens around them. The sun now sits higher, a firm weight pressing down. Linen headwraps darken with sweat. A water carrier walks among them, pouring small mouthfuls of cool water into cupped hands. One worker drinks and mutters softly that the water tastes warm already, as though the sun has reached into the jar. Another remarks that the sun is jealous. It always finds ways to claim what is not offered to it. Their quiet exchange draws faint smiles. As the block reaches the next level, the noise shifts in tone. The ground here is firmer, packed carefully by previous loads. Workers help pivot the stone, easing it into the space where tools await to trim its sides. The platform vibrates faintly under each movement, sending soft tremors through the soreness of the workers' feet. This level of the pyramid is a miniature world on its own. Rows of partly placed blocks from narrow corridors, tool baskets sit in shaded corners. Piles of limestone chips gather near the edges, ready to be swept away. The workers here dig small notches in the platform edges to anchor ropes and levers. A team of men lifts a long wooden beam, its ends wrapped in rawhide, and positions it beneath a raised stone. The beam creaks as weight shifts. The stone moves a finger's width, then another. A lesser-known detail drifts quietly through this area. Archaeologists later discover abandoned tracks of fine gypsum plaster near certain courses, thin layers used briefly to test alignments before being scraped away. These tests remain invisible to the workers moving today, but their traces whisper across centuries. An overseer approaches, his footsteps soft on the sanded surface. He carries a plumb line and a knotted cord. His face remains calm, though he squints slightly against the light. He lowers the plumb line beside the edge of the block, watching how the weight swings. A faint breeze nudges it, then the line settles. He nods, satisfied. The workers adjust their positions and prepare for the delicate task ahead, seating the block precisely into its place. This part of the work requires quiet. The block must be lowered with patient control. Workers brace their ropes, letting the stone descend tiny degrees at a time. Sand is brushed aside, chips are removed. Fingers trace the edges to ensure the surfaces meet cleanly. Once lowered, the block settles with a deep, muted sound, not a thud, but a soft acceptance, as though the stones themselves greet one another. One worker cracks his knuckles and mutters, barely audible, that this stone behaves far better than the one he placed yesterday, which insisted on arguing with him the entire morning. Another, wiping dust from his cheek, replies that perhaps this stone has better manners. Their sleepy humor melts into the warm air like fading echoes. A disputed question hums softly under their feet. How quickly were these levels completed? Some scholars believe a single course might take months. Others think teams worked in coordinated waves, finishing layers far faster. The stones, silent and ancient, offer no conclusive answer. A team brings buckets of fine sand and pours them around the edges of the newly placed block. This sand will help fill tiny gaps and stabilize the weight. Another group uses long wooden paddles to tamp the area, compacting the grains with slow, firm movements. The sound is rhythmic, almost soothing. A dull thump, a small sigh of settling dust, another thump. Above them, the pyramid rises in staggered rows, each waiting for its next stones. The height creates a subtle change in the wind. A faint upward current lifts dust along the walls, sending it drifting in thin spirals. The workers breathe it in with the resigned acceptance of people who have learned that dust, like the sun, is simply part of existence. Overhead, a small flock of desert birds circles once, gliding in lazy arcs before settling near a distant ridge. Their calls are soft, hesitant, as though they too are wary of disturbing the calm. The workers move the tools aside, coil the ropes neatly, and step back to view their work. The block sits flush against its neighbors, aligned with a precision that belies the simplicity of their instruments. The overseer inclines his head slightly, a rare gesture of approval. The workers say nothing. They simply breathe and prepare for the next stone that will soon arrive along the ramp. One man wipes a streak of sweat from his brow and remarks that the day is still morning, yet he feels it reaching for him with greedy hands. His companion, rolling a rope over his shoulder, replies that the sun does not steal. It merely borrows comfort and rarely returns it. Their humor, soft and unhurried, floats above the stone like dust suspended in still air. The block is in place. The level is one stone closer to rising. The day continues. Beyond the ramp, more sledges approach. More water splashes across sand, more ropes tighten. And the monument climbs, breath by breath, stone by stone, toward the slow-burning sky. Word count, 1,238. The midday sun spreads across the plateau with a quiet, unwavering intensity, settling onto every stone, every rope, every grain of sand. The pyramids' half-finished tiers shimmer faintly, their pale surfaces reflecting the light like slow-burning embers. Shadows curl tightly beneath tools and scaffolding, shrinking with each passing minute. Heat settles over everything in a soft but relentless weight, as if the desert places a warm hand on every shoulder. Along the eastern side of the monument, a wide ledge has been cleared for debate, not of words, but of technique. Workers gather in small groups, shifting quietly between tasks, adjusting ropes, arranging baskets of gypsum dust and wooden levers. Overseers walk among them, carrying coils of knotted cord and carved measuring rods. Their footsteps send soft spirals of dust upward. The air hums with the muted rhythm of labor, yet beneath it lies another hum, the question of how to raise stones ever higher. The current ramp climbs along the pyramid's face in a long, steady incline. Its surface is worn smooth from constant use, darkened by water and shaded by woven mats strung between wooden posts. But as the pyramid rises, the distance sharpens, the angle steepens, and the labor intensifies. Another method will be needed soon, though which one remains uncertain. The workers feel this approaching transition, a faint tremor, beneath their sandals. One group rests briefly in the shade cast by the current ramp, sipping from damp clay jars. A worker wipes dust from his forehead and mutters that the ramp seems to grow taller each day, like a stubborn creature determined to outpace them. Another replies softly that the ramp is simply trying to be helpful, stretching itself so they do not have to. Their quiet humor drifts upward, swallowed gently by the heat. Overseers gather along the ramp's midpoint, holding their cords taut between two wooden stakes. They measure the incline carefully, squinting against the glare. The knots along the cord mark fixed distances, allowing them to judge whether the angle remains safe for dragging stones. They move slowly, tracing lines in the sand with fingertips, their voices stereo. Precision requires calm, even under the sun's firm hand. A widely accepted historical truth flows quietly through this scene. Ramps, in one form or another, were essential to pyramid construction. Straight ramps, like this one, long and anchored firmly into the plateau, offered stability, but required immense space. Other designs, zigzagging along the pyramid face or spiraling upward, may have saved material, but their traces are harder to find. The workers of today know only their current ramp, though whispers circulate about new paths being considered. Near the base of the ramp, a team prepares a long wooden beam wrapped at its ends with thick rawhide. The beam is heavy, polished smooth from handling. Workers grip it firmly, planting their sandals into the sand. Their bodies lean in unison as they lift a smaller casing stone onto its side. The stone rocks slightly, as though uncertain whether to cooperate. One worker grunts and mutters that the stone has decided to behave like a stubborn ox. Another, adjusting his grip, replies that at least the stone doesn't kick. Their humor, soft and warm, blends into the faint shimmer of heat. The stone is moved aside to make space for a demonstration. One of the overseers stands nearby, holding a small clay model of the pyramid. Its sides are etched with possible ramp routes, some straight, some winding, some carved as if disappearing into the pyramid itself. The workers glance at it with mild curiosity. Clay models are not unusual. They appear whenever the overseers debate methods without disturbing the actual structure. One worker leans forward slightly and murmurs that the model looks more comfortable than the real pyramid. His companion taps the model gently with a finger and replies that if the stones were the size of pebbles, the job would be much easier. Their quiet observations draw a faint ripple of amusement from those nearby. The overseers discuss options with the calm patience of men accustomed to endless adjustments. They point to the clay grooves, representing a straight continuation of the current ramp. Then they gesture toward a spiraling line that wraps around the model in a slow ascent. Finally, they trace a pathway inside the model, illustrating a hidden corridor that emerges near the upper tiers. A disputed question lingers here, one that modern historians still debate. Did the builders truly create internal ramps within the pyramid? Evidence is sparse, but intriguing. Anomalies in density scans, faint traces in structural patterns, yet nothing decisive. Today, the overseers stand precisely where this mystery begins, at the moment when choices must be made, and only the simplest truths are visible. Workers watch the gestures with quiet interest but return quickly to their tasks. Stone must rise regardless of the method. Tools must be sharpened, sand must be dampened. Ropes must be checked for fraying. The debate belongs to those who draw lines and measure shadows. The labor belongs to those whose hands make the lines into reality. a new group arrives with baskets of gypsum powder. They kneel beside the ramp and sprinkle it in thin layers, smoothing the surface. The powder fills small groups, making the path more even for the next sledge. The men work with slow, rhythmic motions, brushing away excess dust. A lesser-known detail breathes softly here. Gypsum sprinkled in thin layers acts as a gentle lubricant when combined with water, helping heavy loads glide more smoothly. Nearby, workers prepare more water, pouring it from tall jars held in slings. Water darkens the sand instantly, forming cool streaks that steam faintly in the growing heat. The scent of wet earth rises, a soft, grounding aroma. A man dips his fingers into the damp sand and murmurs that the ground feels kinder this way. Another, reshaping a rope coil, replies that the ground may be kind, but the sun certainly is not. Their quiet words drift upward, like dust rising from footsteps. More teams gather at the base of the ramp, preparing for another pull. They test the ropes, examine knots, and brace their feet. A worker sighs softly and declares the stone for this journey in a very particular mood. His companion replies that they all are, stone included, when the sun climbs above their heads. Their slow banter brings faint smiles, shared without energy, but with familiarity. The next block begins its ascent, guided by teams walking backward up the ramp. Their steps are careful, measured, almost ceremonial. The block rises at the pace of a heartbeat. Water carriers walk beside them, offering sips and splashes. The block groans softly against the wood of the sledge, its voice blending into the hum of labor. Above them, the pyramid's higher levels shimmer through a veil of heat. Wooden scaffolding clings to its edges. Workers move along narrow ledges, adjusting wedges, smoothing joints, tapping mallets against casing stones. Their silhouettes sway gently, softened by distance and light. As the block reaches the next tier, the workers pause, catching slow breaths. The overseers note its arrival with calm nods. The debate about ramps continues quietly among them, straight, spiral, internal, but the labor does not wait for conclusions. The day moves on with the certainty of the sun. One man wipes sweat from his brow and murmurs that perhaps the pyramid builds itself, and they are merely here for the view. His companion, tying a knot more tightly, replies that if the pyramid built itself, it would likely work at a more generous pace. Their drowsy humor hums through the warm air, settling as gently as dust on stone. The ramp debate lingers unresolved, as it will for centuries. But the stones continue to rise, one pull, one breath, one moment of quiet determination at a time. The mid-level terraces of the pyramid breathe with a quiet, steady rhythm as the afternoon approaches. The sun hovers just past its peak, no longer climbing, but still fierce, still heavy, still pressing its warm weight onto the stone. The air trembles faintly above the pale surfaces, turning the horizon into a wavering, liquid line. Shadows hide in thin strips beneath blocks, their edges sharp and fleeting. Every surface carries heat, and yet the workers continue moving, slow and deliberate, as though the pyramid itself sets the pace. On this level, the pyramid no longer feels like a single structure, but like a series of step-like platforms connected by narrow ramps and wooden scaffolding. Blocks rest in orderly rows, some placed, some waiting, some freshly trimmed. The atmosphere is a blend of stone dust, warm linen, and the soft, mineral scent released when limestone meets copper. Each breath carries the faint tang of gypsum and sand. The team assigned to the interior core begins their tasks with quiet focus. The core stones are rougher, less polished than the outer casing blocks. They do not need perfect faces, they need mass, stability, weight. Workers gather around the next section to be built, examining gaps between previously placed stones. They kneel, press fists into the sand, and test the firmness beneath. One worker mutters that the ground feels tired today, as though complaining about supporting so much. His companion replies, barely above a whisper, that everything on this plateau has a right to be tired, even the sand. Their humor is soft, drifting into the warm air like grains falling from a chisel. Each core block is shaped not with precision, but with purposeful roughness. Copper chisels bite into limestone with slow, steady cracks. Wooden mallets rise and fall with measured force. The workers trim edges until each block fits closely to the next, though not seamlessly. The gaps will be filled with small chips and packed debris, a technique both efficient and enduring. A widely accepted detail rests quietly here. The pyramid's interior is not made of perfectly shaped blocks, but of a mixture of rough stones, carefully arranged, interlocked, and stabilized. Sand shifts beneath their feet as they work. The platform is uneven, dotted with chips that crunch under every step. Some workers kneel on folded linen strips to protect their knees from the heated stone. One man adjusts his cloth wrap and remarks that the stone feels hot enough to cook their midday meal. His companion nods, adding softly that at least it saves the cook some fuel. Their shared smile, barely formed, vanishes into the shimmering light. Workers begin the placement of a new block. Ropes are looped around it in patterns familiar from countless repetitions. Some pull from the front, walking backward with careful control. Others guide from the sides, pushing and steadying the block's slow, deliberate movement. The sound is a low scrape, softened by the sand beneath the block's underside. Sweat gathers along brows, dripping in slow beads that fall onto the pale stone and vanish instantly. The block reaches its place. It hovers a finger's width above its final resting point, held aloft by wedges. Workers crouch down to check alignment. They press their palms against neighboring stones, feeling 4 level surfaces. A plumb line is lowered, the weight swinging gently before settling into stillness. The overseer nods once, the wedges are tapped free, and the block settles with a muted, resonant sigh. Dust puffs outward, drifting in lazy spirals. Nearby, a team shapes smaller stones to fill gaps. These filler pieces are as essential as the heavy blocks. Workers kneel beside piles of chips, selecting fragments like quiet craftsmen choosing ingredients. They place each piece with deliberate care, pressing them firmly into crevices before tamping the surrounding area. A lesser-known detail hums softly here. Some gaps contain traces of powdered gypsum mixed with small stones, acting as a primitive form of mortar. It does not glue the stones, but it stabilizes them, distributing weight evenly. The workers build upward, one layer at a time, using levers fashioned from long beams of sturdy wood. The beams creak under pressure, but hold firm. A worker grips one beam tightly and leans into it, guiding a stone a few centimeters to the left. His expression remains calm, though the effort pulls muscles tight across his back. Another worker adjusts his stance, sweat glistening across his temple, and murmurs that the beam complains more than they do. His companion, pulling at the rope, replies that the beam simply wishes to be included in the conversation. Their weary humor, whispered into the heat, brings a brief ease to the heavy air. Farther along the terrace, workers carve drainage channels along the edges of the platform, narrow grooves meant to guide rainwater away during rare storms. The grooves are shallow, but precise. The workers run their fingers through the dusty channels, smoothing the edges. They do not expect heavy rain, but the desert has its surprises. A disputed question lingers beneath this task. Did the builders truly worry about rain erosion during construction, or were these channels purely symbolic? Some scholars argue practicality, others suggest ritual meaning. The pyramid remains silent on the matter. A gust of hot wind sweeps across the terrace, lifting pale dust in swirling shapes. It settles quickly, coating hair, skin, and linen. Workers brush it from their faces with soft, resigned gestures. The dust is constant, a companion as familiar as the sun. It clings to sweat, turns fingers white, hides itself in every crease. One man wipes his palms and mutters that the dust must see itself as an apprentice, eager to take part in the construction. Another replies that the dust may be the only thing here that never rests. Their quiet amusement drifts upward like thin smoke. A water carrier arrives with jars wrapped in damp cloth. He offers small drinks, pouring into cupped hands. The water tastes faintly of clay, but brings needed relief. Worker swallows slowly, letting the coolness linger before returning the jars. The carrier moves on, his sandals stirring faint patterns in the sand. The team resumes shaping the core. Blocks are nudged into place. Chips are packed tightly. Grooves are carved. Dust rises and falls. The sun begins its long descent toward afternoon, casting shadows that stretch once more across the pyramid's face. A faint breeze returns, brushing along the terraces, lifting a tiny measure of heat from the workers' shoulders. One man stands, stretches his back, and remarks quietly that the pyramid seems to grow faster than they can blink. His companion, adjusting a rope knot, replies that it only seems fast because they stare at the same stones for so long. Their humor is gentle, carried on the warm wind. The level grows, block by block, breath by breath. The core rises, heavy and imperfect, bound by weight and effort. Each stone becomes part of the internal skeleton of the monument, hidden from view, but essential to its strength. No one will ever see these blocks once the pyramid is sealed, but their presence shapes the entire structure. The workers, covered in dust and wrapped in warmth, continue their slow ascent across the terrace. Tools glint in softened light. The sounds of labor drift into the afternoon. The monument grows, and the sun begins its long, inevitable slide toward evening. The afternoon light settles across the upper terraces with a muted, honey-colored glow, softening the harsh edges of the limestone. The blocks stacked here are smoother than those in the core below, their faces trimmed with care, their angles measured until each corner sits proud and clean. These are the outer casing stones, destined to give the pyramid its gleaming surface. Even half finished, they reflect the sun in quiet bursts, like pale mirrors scattered across a stepped landscape. Workers move carefully between them, navigating narrow ledges where a misstep would send dust spiraling down in long ribbons. The air here carries the faint scent of warm stone, mixed with the sharp tang of copper and the gentle earthiness of gypsum dust. Every sound is softened by height, chisels tapping, ropes brushing, sandals sliding, all muted under the thick hush of the descending sun. At the edge of the terrace, an overseer crouches beside a newly cut casing stone, lowering a plumb line along its face. The weight swings gently, tugged by a tiny breeze that moves lazily between the blocks. He waits for the line to settle, then nods, satisfied. The workers nearby respond not with words, but with quiet motions, tightening ropes, adjusting handholds, preparing to lift the stone a short distance to its place. Casing stones demand precision. Their outer faces must align in long, unbroken lines so straight that future observers would measure them in awe. A widely accepted detail rests here. The accuracy of these edges, maintained with simple tools, remains one of the most impressive aspects of pyramid construction. The workers do not think of this. They think only of alignment, shadow, and balance. As the stone is lifted, the sound changes slightly, a heavier scrape, a more deliberate pause between breaths. The workers lean into their ropes with practiced grace. Each man knows his place. Some pull from the front, some guide at the sides, some stabilize from behind. Their muscles shift beneath coarse linen, catching grains of dust that cling to sweat in small patterns. One worker, bracing his foot against a wooden block, murmurs that this stone must have spent its morning sunbathing, given how warm it feels. Another, adjusting his grip, replies that the stone likely enjoys the heat more than they do. Their gentle humor ripples through the air, soft as the shadow cast by the ramp above them. The stone moves into position beside its neighbors. Workers crouch low, pressing their palms against the edges. They study the fit with the intense focus of craftsmen whose work will outlast their own lives. A plumb line is lowered again. A straight cord is stretched along the row. Shadows are examined, not guessed, but measured by eye and instinct. The stone is a finger's width too high. No one sighs loudly, no one curses. Instead, they lift wooden levers and slide thin limestone chips into the gap. The block rises with a soft groan. They tap the wedges free again. A lesser-known detail whispers at this moment. Some wedges were made of local tamarisk wood, chosen for its flexibility under pressure. The wood, though humble, was essential in adjusting the finest alignments. The stone sinks. Its edges touch its neighbors more evenly. Dust rises in thin puffs. The workers test the seam with callous fingers, their motions slow and thoughtful. The overseer nods once more at the plumb line stills. Stillness is success. Further down the terrace, a team carves grooves along a series of casing stones, trimming the backs where they must fit against the rougher core. Copper chisels strike the limestone with steady taps. The sound carries softly, losing strength as it drifts upward. Each blow leaves behind a thin ribbon of powder. The workers brush it away, revealing fresh, pale stone beneath. One man pauses to test his chisel's edge. He taps it against his palm and frowns. Copper dulls quickly on the harder casing stones. He mutters that the chisel seems determined to avoid its responsibilities. A companion, sharpening his own tool against sandstone, replies that the chisel must simply be exhausted from working all day. Their soft amusement drifts upward like a warm exhale. Wooden mallets rise and fall in slow arcs. Chips scatter across the terrace, collecting in small piles that workers sweep into baskets. Sand collects on the stones in thin sheets, shifting with every footstep. The air hums with low, rhythmic murmurs, the sound of a construction site wrapped in silence. A disputed question lingers beneath these stones, one that future scholars will debate. Were the casing stones polished to a mirror gleam before placement or after? Some evidence suggests polishing afterward with fine abrasives. Others believe the stones arrived nearly finished. Here, the workers leave the question hanging like heat in the air. Their focus remains on shape and placement, not polish. Along the terrace edge, water carriers climb carefully, balancing jars wrapped in damp cloth. They stop beside the teams, offering small handfuls of water. Even in the softening light, the heat persists, heavy and low. Workers drink slowly, pressing the water against the roofs of their mouths before swallowing. Clay cups clink gently. A carrier adjusts his jar sling and murmurs that the water is warming faster than he can walk. A worker wiping his brow replies that the water and sun must be conspiring. Their murmured humor eases the dense afternoon air. The workers return to their tasks. Another casing block is lifted. A cord is stretched. Shadows are studied. A line of stones begins to form an elegant, straight edge across the terrace, catching the descending light like a pale ribbon. Their surfaces glow softly, warming under the sun but reflecting just enough light to appear cool from a distance. The scaffolding beside them creaks quietly as wind moves through the tide reeds. Wooden poles wrapped in rope support planks where workers walk. Though they tread lightly, the height commands respect. Below, the lower terraces fall away in a series of steps, each lined with stones placed earlier in the day. The view downward shifts with the heat, turning edges into blur. Workers scrape excess sand away from the newly seated stones. The sound is a soft, steady whisper. Gypsum dust is sprinkled into small gaps when necessary, filling spaces to fine for stone chips. The dust puffs upward when touched, forming a faint cloud that settles slowly. As the sun dips toward late afternoon, the light softens further, casting long shadows across the terrace. The casing stones catch the glow in gentle gradients. Each stone seems to pulse with captured warmth. The pyramid's outer surface slowly takes shape, not gleaming yet, not polished, but ready for its transformation. A worker straightens his back with a quiet groan. He remarks that these smoother stones seem lighter simply because they behave themselves. His companion, placing a wedge beneath the block, replies that perhaps the stones have grown polite with height. Their soft laughter drifts into the cooling air. The overseer walks the terrace, trailing his fingers along the new line of stones. His expression remains calm, but the faint nod he gives is enough. The workers continue, stone by stone, patience layered atop precision. And as the terrace grows, the afternoon deepens, the pyramid rises with it, its edges sharpened, its face slowly smoothing into the grand shape that will one day catch the sun like a silent flame. The light begins its slow descent into late afternoon, settling across the upper terraces with a gentler, amber glow. The harshness of midday fades little by little, replaced by a softer warmth that loosens muscles and quiets the air. Stone blocks cool enough to touch without flinching. Shadows lengthen carefully, laying themselves across pathways and scaffolding like narrow strips of woven cloth. The pyramid, still far from complete, seems to breathe with the teams working across its tiers, each movement shaping the great body of stone into something more refined. On this level, the overseers move with particular precision. Their task is not to place stones or pull ropes, but to hold order together, to shape the thousands of separate actions into a single purpose. They are the quiet architects of rhythm. One walks with a knotted measuring cord coiled around his arm, the knots dangling like small seeds. Another carries a plumb line, the weight polished smooth by hundreds of uses. A third shades his eyes with his palm, examining the slope of the casing stones under the changing light. They speak rarely, and when they do, their voices rest just above a whisper. In this heat, words travel far more gently. The overseer with the measuring cord pauses beside a half-fitted stone. He lowers the cord, stretching it accurately along the surface. His fingers find the knots by touch alone. The stone aligns well. He nods once. A worker beside him relaxes his shoulders. Even a silent nod from an overseer carries its own kind of approval, rare and subtle. Another overseer checks the horizontal alignment of a row. He sets a straight wooden rod on its edge, then kneels to study the shadow beneath it. A thin, even line means the surface is level. A thicker shadow, or a broken one, means correction. The shadow here lies narrow and consistent. The overseer exhales softly, almost imperceptibly. Workers nearby continue without pause, trusting the tools more than any spoken instruction. A widely accepted historical details, quietly in this scene, the pyramid's astonishing accuracy did not come from complex devices, but from simple tools guided by trained eyes, cords, rods, plumb lines, shadows. Precision created not by technology, but by consistency. As the overseers move along the terrace, the workers shift stones with slow concentration. A block is nudged into place using long wooden levers. Rawhide creaks, sand shifts under sandals. A worker presses his palm against the stone, testing for small wobbles. Another crouches low, peering beneath the block to check if chips need adjusting. A third presses gypsum dust into a thin gap with a wooden spatula, sealing the seam. Their motions are coordinated not by commands, but by instinct, years of repetition, creating its own choreography. One worker, adjusting the lever beneath a stubborn stone, mutters that this particular block just have decided it's comfortable where it is. His companion, wiping dust from his cheek, replies softly that the stone likely knows it is destined for a more important view and simply wants more time to prepare. Their quiet exchange elicits faint smiles from those closest, the kind of shared humor that keeps breath steady through the heat. Ropes lie coiled in neat piles nearby. A lesser-known detail lives inside those coils. They are made not only from palm fibers, but often from halfa grass, twisted tightly to form cords surprisingly strong and surprisingly flexible. Each coil has been repaired many times. The knots tell stories of earlier breaks, earlier loads, earlier struggles. A water carrier arrives, his jars wrapped in damp cloth darkened by evaporating moisture. He moves among the teams, pouring small drinks into cupped hands. The clay jars smell faintly of river mud, but the water inside refreshes even in its warmth. A worker drinks slowly and murmurs that the water seems to grow tired, climbing the terraces. Another replies that water and workers alike suffer the sun's opinions. Their soft laughter fades into the lengthening shadows. Farther along the terrace, a new challenge appears, a casing stone slightly too large for its assigned space. It must be trimmed not with force, but with patience. A team of stone cutters gathers around it. They kneel on folded linen, place chisel edges against the stone, and strike in gentle, measured taps. Each tap leaves a pale curl of dust. The block's shape slowly adjusts, not through power, but through slow negotiation. The overseer with the plumb line watches from a careful distance. He lowers the line against the stone side. The weight swings and settles, the edge still sits a fraction too wide. He raises a hand, one gesture, nothing more. The workers resume their trimming without a word. A disputed question drifts quietly through this work. How exactly did the builders achieve such perfect alignment over vast distances? Some believe teams coordinated from separate sides, using star observations. Others think long sightlines marked from the plateau shape the angles. The workers of today do not consider the arguments. They rely on chords, shadows, and silent coordination. As they shape the block, the sun dips lower, casting long amber rays across their hands. The stone warms under their touch, though less fiercely than at midday. Dust gathers in hair, eyebrows, and the folds of linen wraps. The stonecutters brush it away with habitual swipes. Dust always returns, loyal and insistent. One man pauses, stretching his fingers. He murmurs that his chisel seems to have given up its will entirely. His companion, sharpening his own chisel against a sandstone block, replies calmly that tools have moods just like workers. They both smile faintly, returning to their tasks with renewed patience. The block, finally trimmed, approaches its new place. Workers grip the sides with careful strength. They lift slightly, slide wooden levers beneath it, and guide it forward. Sand sprays gently underfoot. The block rests against its neighbors with a soft sound, a muted kiss of stone meeting stone. The overseer checks it once more. The plumb line settles perfectly. The cord lies straight. The shadow beneath the leveling rod is thin and clean. This stone, at last, agrees to belong. As the afternoon deepens, the terrace takes on a quieter tone. Workers begin arranging tools for the next sequence. Chisels are set in baskets. Mallets are placed beneath cloths to keep them cool. Ropes are untangled, shaken free of dust, and coiled neatly for tomorrow's pulls. The overseers walk a final path along the terrace, checking lines with the calm patience of men who understand that precision is a daily ritual, not a single achievement. A faint wind drifts across the height of the pyramid. It carries with it the sense of warm stone, dusty linen, and the distant camp below, bread baking, fires smouldering, water sloshing in jars. The wind cools the workers' skin in thin, passing touches. One of them lifts his head slightly, eyes half-lidded, and murmurs that even the breeze seems too tired to stay. Another responds gently that the breeze is simply wise, it comes only when needed. Their soft exchange melts into the golden light. The workers step back from the finished row. The stones gleam in the fading sun, aligned in a perfect line that catches the light like a soft blade. The terrace looks changed, more complete, more settled, more certain in its form. The overseers exchange quiet glances. Their nods are subtle but unmistakable. The day continues its slow drift toward evening. The pyramid grows, and the plateau holds its breath in warm, shimmering silence. Late afternoon settles gently across the plateau, softening the edges of stone and scaffolding as though the desert itself exhales after holding its breath all day. The light changes warmer now, deeper, shifting slowly into shades of honey and amber. Long shadows stretch across the terraces like dark ribbons, pulling beneath blocks and drifting lazily over ropes and tools. The heat no longer presses. It lingers instead as a slow, steady warmth clinging to skin and stone. On a flat stretch near the base of the pyramid, workers gather for their midday meal. The labor of morning and early afternoon has left them coated in dust, sweat, and the faint scent of copper. Some sit cross-legged on reed mats spread across the packed ground. Others lean on stones still warm from the day. The air carries smells of bread, onions, dried fish, and warm beer, simple, heavy foods meant to restore strength rather than delight. Large earthen jars stand in shaded niches, their rims darkened from frequent use. Workers lift the lids and ladle beer into cups made from fired clay. The drink is thick, cloudy, carrying the earthy scent of barley mash. One man peers into his cup and remarks softly that it looks more like porridge today. Another, swirling his own drink, replies that perhaps the brewer has decided to save time by making lunch and drink in one pot. Their quiet jokes drift through the warm air, stirring faint smiles from tired faces. Bread baskets opened with soft rustles. The loaves are dense and slightly cracked from baking round barley pieces still warm at the center, though cooled at the crust. Workers tear pieces slowly, letting the grainy texture soften on their tongues. Some dip the bread into bowls of mashed beans or crushed garlic. The flavors are strong, simple, grounding. The salt from dried fish mingles with the sweetness of baked grain, forming familiar combinations. A widely accepted historical detail hums gently in this moment. The diet of pyramid workers was remarkably hearty. Bread, onions, beer, dried fish, dates, lentils, food designed to sustain bodies under sun and stone. Their meals were not feasts, but they were dependable, balanced, and surprisingly nutritious. Children from the worker village wander nearby, carrying small jars of water for their parents. Their feet patter across the dusty ground in soft, quick steps. One child, overwhelmed by the heat, fans himself with a palm leaf, mimicking the motion of overseers who shade their eyes in the sun. A worker nearby chuckles quietly and remarks that the boy seems to understand the job better than some adults. Another replies that the boy already has the most important skill, complaining about heat. Their gentle laughter melts into the warm air. Women from the village distribute bowls of lentils, seasoned with herbs. They move through the resting workers with practiced ease, balancing jars and bowls without spilling. The lentils carry a faint scent of coriander and dried saltbush, creating a soft, earthy aroma that blends with the breeze. A lesser-known detail lingers here. Archaeologists have found remnants of coriander seeds and wild herbs in ancient workers' bowls, hinting at small efforts to bring flavor to the monotonous meals. Workers eat slowly, savoring the brief moment of calm. The soundscape shifts, less hammering, fewer shouts, more murmured conversations, blending into a soft hum. The occasional clink of pottery echoes gently between the stone blocks. Even the donkeys in the animal pens fall into a rare silence, resting their weary legs under patches of shade. A thin breeze moves across the camp, bringing the faint smell of baking bread from the village ovens. Workers close their eyes briefly, letting the breeze cool the sweat on their temples. One man sighs and murmurs that the wind must have taken pity on them today. His companion, leaning back on his hands, replies that the wind is wise enough to arrive only after the worst is over. Their tired humor drifts upward, carried along the shifting air. As they finish eating, a few workers stretch their backs carefully, bones cracking softly. Others rub aching arms or massage sore shoulders. The afternoon has been long, and stone is never gentle. A disputed question floats quietly through the back of their minds, though not in words. How many hours of labor did each day hold? Modern scholars debate it. Some argue 10 hours, others more. But here, on the plateau, time is measured not in hours, but in shadows, tasks, and the slow movement of light. Workers begin returning empty jars to the shade. Clay cups are rinsed at a small trough filled from a nearby canal. A thin trickle of water runs down into the dry earth, disappearing instantly. The air grows cooler by degrees, though the heat still clings stubbornly to stone. The workers rise slowly, no rushing, no sudden motions. They dust sand from their linen wraps, adjust their belts, and tie fresh knots around their headcloths. The sun drifts lower, shadows stretch farther. The afternoon enters its final breath. Teams gather for the next phase of work, moving smaller stones into gaps, adjusting blocks that settled unevenly, cleaning terraces of excess chips. Children retreat to the village, women collect bowls and baskets. The hum of labor rises again, steady and calm. One man adjusts a rope coil and murmurs that the sun seems less angry now. Another, smearing dust from his palm, replies that the sun simply prefers to scold in the morning and brood in the afternoon. Their soft jokes move gently through the ranks like warm ripples. Workers return to the terraces, their silhouettes blending with the golden stone. The pyramid shifts once more from resting place to working world. Tools rise, voices murmur, dust lifts, and above it all, the evening waits slow, patient, inevitable. The late afternoon deepens into an hour shaped by heat that refuses to leave quietly. It does not scorch anymore. Instead it lingers, a warm, wavering veil that clings to every stone, every rope, every fold of linen. The pyramid's upper terraces gleam softly, their pale surfaces absorbing the last fullness of sunlight. The shifting air makes the edges of the structure blur slightly, as though the monument breathes along with the workers who climb its rising steps. This is the hour when labor slows, but does not stop. Movements become deliberate, controlled. Muscles warm from the long day ease into steady rhythms, rather than bursts of strength. The sounds change too. The sharp clack of copper on stone grows less frequent. The deeper thud of levering blocks becomes measured and gentle. The desert, though still warm, begins to open itself to cooler winds that hesitate along the edges of the terraces. High on one of the mid-levels, teams prepare to place several final stones before dusk approaches. These blocks are not part of the casing, nor the rough interior core. They are transitional stones, shaped carefully to anchor the next upward step. Workers examine them with the subdued concentration of people who know that the day's energy just be rationed thoughtfully. Each block glows faintly, holding the afternoon's heat like stored breath. Ropes are uncoiled, wooden levers are set. Dust gathers on arms, brows, and bare feet. One worker presses his palm to the block and murmurs that the stone still holds enough warmth to rival a cookfire. His companion, kneeling beside a rope loop, replies softly that at least the stone does not demand dinner. Their humor is faint but real, drifting like a thin thread through the warm air. The overseers stand nearby with plumb lines and knotted cords. Their voices remain low and even, shaped by the steady pace of the hour. They watch shadows lengthen along the terrace floor, long strips of darkness that stretch like narrow roads between stone corridors. A widely accepted truth hums through their presence as the workers rely on their hands. The overseers rely on angles, shadows, and distances. Together, the monument grows. The first block of this sequence is moved using levers and simple manpower. Workers wedge the beams beneath the stone and apply pressure with slow coordination. The stone lifts slightly, creaking against its wooden support. A man adjusts his footing and murmurs that the block must be thinking carefully about whether it wishes to move. Another, pushing the lever with a calm breath, replies that the block has had all day to think. It should be ready by now. A few tired smiles appear around them. As the stone is nudged forward, sand shifts beneath it in soft cascades. Gypsum dust, applied earlier to smooth the surface, rises in pale clouds before settling again. The workers breathe through their noses, accustomed to the fine powder that lingers everywhere. Their footprints leave shallow impressions along the terrace, soon to be brushed aside as part of the next task. A team of stonecutters waits beside the next step in the structure, tools arranged in neat rows. Their mallets rest on folded cloth to keep them from heating too much. Sandstone blocks for sharpening sit close at hand. They watch the approaching stone with patient readiness. One sharp-eyed worker studies its edges and mutters that the block will need a little persuasion before it fits. His companion nods, as though the stone has already informed them of its opinion. When the block reaches its final position, the cutters approach. They kneel and begin trimming the last small protrusions, the ones that would prevent a perfect fit. Copper chisels tap in soft rhythms, echoing in gentle pulses through the terrace. Each tap produces delicate curls of pale powder. The smell of freshly cut limestone drifts upward, cool and mineral, mingling with the warm scent of sun-baked stone. A lesser-known detail hides in their method. After chiseling, they sometimes grind edges with handfuls of fine desert sand, using it as a natural abrasive. The sand, coarse enough to shape but fine enough to smooth, obeys their movements like a silent tool. It shifts under their fingers, catching the light in tiny flickers. Once the block is trimmed, workers examine the base, where it will settle. They test the compacted debris beneath, pressing with their heels and adjusting the surface with short wooden paddles. A disputed question lingers here. Modern scholars still debate exactly how much packing material filled the inner gaps of the pyramid's upper levels. Some argue 4 tight, interlocking stones, others 4 layers of chips. The workers themselves follow whichever technique the day requires, guided by the overseer's quiet gestures. They lower the block slowly using wooden beams. Ropes guide its descent, hands steadying it from all sides. The stone sinks with a muted, heavy exhale into the space prepared for it. Dust rises in thin spirals. The edges meet their neighbors cleanly. The overseer lowers his plumb line once more. The weight swings, hesitates, then settles into stillness. A nod. The workers ease their shoulders. One leans against a nearby stone and murmurs that this block behaved like a cooperative elder. Another, rolling a rope coil with sluggish motions, replies that cooperative elders are rare. They had better enjoy the moment. Their laughter is quiet, soft as distant sand shifting in wind. The next block is smaller and lighter, but the heat makes lifting it feel no easier. The workers guide it up a short ramp of compacted sand. Their sandals slip slightly on the warm grains. The block grinds gently against its wooden sledge, like a creature sighing under the last hours of daylight. Water is sprinkled sparingly to cool the ramp. The scent of damp earth lifts briefly into the air. One man wipes sweat from his neck and murmurs that even the water seems tired of being water. Another, adjusting his linen wrap, replies that everything grows weary by this hour, except the sun, which refuses to rest. Their soft conversation drifts up toward the terrace edges. The block is placed with less resistance than the first. Workers check alignment with cords stretched across the course. They study the shadows cast by the stones, thin, sharp lines that reveal any slight tilt. The shadows show no faults. Another nod from the overseer. Around them, other teams continue their tasks. Some sweep chips into baskets. Others carve small grooves where drainage must be allowed. A few brush fine dust from the edges of the casing stones below, preparing surfaces for tomorrow's work. The terrace becomes a web of small motions, each slow, deliberate, and part of the larger rhythm. Above the workers, the sky deepens into late afternoon gold. A faint breeze slides between the stones, bringing with it a hint of cooling air. It brushes over sweaty foreheads and dust-coated arms. Some lift their faces into it, eyes closed briefly, savoring the fleeting relief. Others continue without pause, accustomed to enduring heat without expecting mercy. The pyramid casts a long shadow across the plateau, stretching toward the worker village. Smoke from cooking fires rises in thin plumes, carrying scents of legumes and baking bread. The sound of distant voices reaches the terraces, calm, domestic, grounding. Workers glance toward the village, though only for a moment. The day is not done. A few stones remain to be placed before dusk. As the final block of this session reaches the terrace, one man lifts his mallet and murmurs that the stone must have decided to arrive fashionably late. His companion, brushing dust from his sandals, replies gently that stones, like people, have their moods near the end of the day. Their quiet exchange settles into the fading warmth. The block is set, measured, leveled. The workers step back, breathing deeply, letting the heat drift from their bodies in slow waves. And the sun inches closer to the horizon, casting the terraces in a soft, amber glow, each stone catching the light like a quiet promise of the monument still to come. The light slips slowly toward the horizon, settling into a deeper, richer gold that softens every edge of the rising monument. On the upper terraces, shadows lengthen and merge, creating pockets of coolness where workers pause for brief breaths before returning to their tasks. The air shifts, still warm, still heavy, but carrying the first hints of evening. The pyramid glows faintly, as though holding the last warmth of the day inside its massive body. Here, near the inner passages and chambers, the mood changes. The sounds of labor become quieter, more contained. Work within the pyramid is different from the broad activity on the terraces outside. Echoes linger longer, footsteps sound muted on compacted dust. Voices drop without being told. The interior is a world of shadows and stone, touched only faintly by the sun's distant reach. Workers step into the entrance passage carrying oil lamps wrapped in linen. The lamps flicker gently, casting thin, trembling halos of light along the walls. The air inside is cooler, smelling of limestone dust and the faint sweetness of smoke. The walls are rough here, not smooth casing stone, but raw, chiseled surfaces bearing the marks of thousands of careful cuts. A thin haze of dust hangs suspended in the still air, stirred only when someone walks too quickly. A team enters with wooden wedges, chisels, and baskets of stone chips. They are preparing to adjust part of a corridor that runs downward toward the unfinished chamber. The corridor tilts slightly, a deliberate angle carved into the pyramid's geometry. A widely accepted historical detail rests quietly here. These angles and alignments were designed with astonishing precision, guided by the stars, the horizon, and measured shadows. Even without polish, the corridors hold mathematical intention. Workers crouch beside the wall, setting their tools on folded linen to keep them from rolling on the sloped floor. One traces his hand along a chalk line drawn earlier by an overseer. He murmurs that the stone beneath feels strangely cold for the hour. His companion, lighting another lamp, replies softly that perhaps the walls prefer the company of shadows rather than sunlight. Their quiet humor drifts down the passage like a small ripple in still water. Chisels rise and fall in slow rhythm. The sound is softer here, muffled, absorbed by surrounding stone. Each tap produces a small sprinkle of powder that drifts to the floor in delicate streams. Workers brush it aside with short, steady strokes. They continue adjusting the angle of the corridor, shaving the stone in tiny increments. Their movements must be precise. Too much force would break edges that need to remain intact. Farther inside, another team examines the ceiling of a chamber supported by massive granite beams. These beams sit above one another like silent guardians, distributing the weight of millions of stones above. The workers run their hands along the smooth granite surface, inspecting 4 floors. A lesser-known detail lingers here. Granite was often moved from far to the south, hauled along the river before being dragged across the plateau. A labor far heavier than the limestone blocks outside. One worker peers upward, squinting into the dimness. He mutters that the beam feels as stubborn as ever, refusing to reveal its intentions. His companion, checking a crack along the wall, replies gently that stone keeps its secrets better than people. Their soft voices echo upward into the ceiling, fading into the dark. As they work, a question quietly hums beneath their tasks, one that later scholars will never fully agree on. Why were so many chambers built inside? Some argue for religious symbolism, others for engineering necessity, others still for rituals long forgotten. Standing here, in the near dark, the workers sense mystery without questioning it. The overseers place marks, the masons follow, the pyramid grows. A faint breeze moves through the corridor, not from outside, but from shifting air as workers cross through narrow spaces. Lamps flicker, shadows dance along sharp angles, dust rises in soft spirals. One man steadies his flame with a cupped hand and mutters that even the air seems moody at this hour. His companion, setting a wedge beneath a protruding stone, murmurs that the air simply enjoys being dramatic in enclosed spaces. Their sleepy humor warms the cold breath of the chambers. Workers begin adjusting a stone block meant to form part of a relieving space above the chamber. They lift it onto a wooden sledge and guide it forward inch by inch. The passage is tight, forcing them to move sideways, backs brushing the walls. Sand shifts beneath their feet, muffling their steps. The block scrapes gently, sending slow vibrations into the floor beneath them. A plumb line is lowered to check vertical alignment. The weight swings lazily before settling. The overseer nods once. The workers begin placing wedges beneath the block to raise it the final few centimeters. They tap gently, small, precise sounds. Dust drifts down in faint threads. The block settles into place with a muted, contented sound, as though agreeing at last to join the structure. Outside in the fading sunlight, teams adjust the angle of the upper ramps, preparing for tomorrow's tasks. But inside, work remains delicate, quiet. The inner chambers hold a different kind of pressure, not from weight alone, but from intention. Every shape has meaning, every angle has purpose. The workers do not need to know what that purpose is. They simply act as steady hands, shaping what the overseers envision. One man brushes dust from a carved mark in the wall. He frowns softly and murmurs that the mark looks older than the others, perhaps from a previous plan. His companion, gathering stone chips into a basket, replies that plans change, stones change, but the pyramid remains determined. Their gentle words disappear into the corridor, like breath into the dark. As the lamps burn lower, the workers begin to withdraw from the chambers. They move through the narrowing passages, like quiet ghosts, carrying tools and baskets of debris. The air grows warmer as they near the entrance. Evening light spills faintly across the threshold, washing the limestone in soft orange. Stepping out of the corridor, they blink against the brightness. The terrace glows with the last rays of the sun. The wind carries warmth mixed with the cooler promise of dusk. Below, the village stirs with preparations for evening meals. The smells of cooking drift upward. The workers descend the scaffolding slowly, tired but steady. Their tools clink softly against one another. Dust falls from their wraps in pale clouds. And behind them, the inner chambers slip back into silence, cool, shadowed, mysterious, waiting for tomorrow's light and tomorrow's hands. The sun sinks lower, settling into a deep, burnished glow that wraps the upper terraces of the pyramid in soft amber light. The harshness of the day dissolves into a gentler warmth, leaving the stones golden and calm, as though they have finally stopped resisting the touch of heat. Shadows grow long and slender, stretching across the ramps and pulling beside the blocks, like dark ribbons woven into the structure's rising form. This is the hour when the workers begin preparing for one of the most delicate tasks of all, raising the pyramid toward its summit. Though the true capstone will come much later, the work at higher levels begins here, with precise placements, careful measurements, and the slow construction of narrower tiers. Every stone lifted now brings the structure closer to its final silhouette. On the uppermost finished terrace, a small team gathers around a set of stones, shaped more finely than the rough core blocks, but not as polished as the casing stones. These transitional stones form the upper courses and must be leveled with particular care. The workers move around them quietly, tired but steady. Tools clink softly, dust lifts with each slow step. One man presses his hand to a block and murmurs that the stone holds the day's warmth like a stubborn pot that refuses to cool. His companion, adjusting a rope loop, replies gently that perhaps the stone simply enjoys the attention. Their humor, soft and slow, drifts upward with the warm air. At the center of the terrace stands the temporary wooden platform, the four lifting smaller stones toward the next level. It is made of beams lashed together with thick rope, the wood worn smooth from months of handling. Workers test its stability with careful pressure, rocking it slightly, listening to the subtle creak of wooden fibers settling. A widely accepted detail lives inside this moment. Even at great heights, the builders use simple wooden contraptions, arranged with precision and maintained constantly, to lift smaller but essential stones. A team approaches with ropes coiled around their shoulders. They gather around a stone placed on a narrow sledge, positioning themselves with deliberate care. The air is thinner here, not in breath but in sound. Voices fade faster, swallowed by the open sky. One worker squints toward the horizon and remarks that the plateau looks as though it has softened under the evening light. Another nods and murmurs that even the desert knows when it is time to rest. The overseer arrives with a knotted cord and a wooden leveling rod. His face glows faintly from the sun's last rays. He lowers a plumb line beside the stone, watching the weight sway gently before settling. He does not speak. His approval comes in a single slow nod, and the workers begin. 4 men grip the ropes to guide the sides. The remaining team stands ready to steady the block as it rises. They lean their weight back in measured unison, lifting the stone inch by inch. The ropes creak softly, the wooden platform groans but holds. Dust drifts upward in ribbons as the block rises. A faint breeze moves across the terrace, brushing against the worker's skin. It carries with it the cool scent of dusk, mixed with the smell of warm stone. Several men lift their faces briefly, savoring the fleeting relief. One murmurs that the wind has finally remembered them. Another replies that the wind simply enjoys dramatic entrances. Higher and higher the block rises until it reaches the upper ledge. Workers steady it with outstretched palms, guiding it gently onto the next platform. The stone settles with a muted thud. The sound echoes lightly into the open air, absorbed quickly by the vast desert stretching below. A disputed question lingers softly around this moment. How exactly were the highest stones placed? Some scholars believe spiral ramps wrapped tightly around the pyramid. Others argue for internal corridors, hidden from sight. Still others imagine cranes or wooden lifting machines. Here, on this terrace, the workers reveal only one truth, that they lift the stones with steady hands, rope, and patience. The rest of the mystery belongs to time. Once the block is positioned, stonecutters kneel to trim its backside. Copper chisels strike in slow, methodical rhythms, creating small arcs of pale dust that swirl briefly before settling. The sound is gentle, like taps on a wooden drum. The workers brush the dust away carefully. Every edge must be shaped to fit its neighbors perfectly. One cutter taps his chisel, examines its dull edge, and mutters that copper has grown weary again, tired long before he is. His companion, sharpening his chisel on sandstone, replies that perhaps the tools wish to finish early and go home. Their soft laughter ripples through the terrace. When the block is ready, workers place wooden wedges beneath it. They lift it slightly with levers, adjust its base, and lower it slowly. Sand is brushed aside. Chips are packed into small gaps. A plumb line confirms the angle. A straight rod tests the surface. Everything aligns. The overseer nods again, a gesture of approval that sinks deeply into the worker's tired limbs. This stone is secure. As the sun dips closer to the horizon, the workers prepare one last stone for the upper course. This one is smaller, a transitional piece that will support future lifting platforms. It is shaped neatly, with crisp edges and a slightly inclined surface. The workers tease it gently, saying it looks like a stone trying to stand tall before its time. Another replies that even stones dream of being capstones. Their humor breathes through the fading warmth. They lift the stone with ropes, guiding it toward its place at the terrace's edge. The horizon glows deep orange. A thin wind sweeps through the pathways, lifting dust in small spirals. The voices from the lower levels grow faint, replaced by the quiet of height and distance. The block settles into position, fitting neatly against its neighbors. The overseer lowers his plumb line one final time. It swings, slows, and rests. Evening settles. Workers coil ropes with slow movements, their shadows stretching long across the terrace. The wooden platform creaks as they release its tension. Chisels are wrapped in cloth, mallets tucked beneath planks. Stones warm the air with their last trapped heat. The pyramid's silhouette sharpens against the sky. Its upper course is inching toward the distant point where the capstone will one day rest. For now, these small stones, lifted quietly in the golden hour, bring the monument one breath closer to its final shape. The day wanes, the workers descend, the stone holds its place, warm and silent beneath the deepening sky. Dusk folds itself slowly over the plateau, arriving not as a sudden curtain, but as a gentle dimming, a steady softening of light that calms the harsh edges of stone. The pyramid's rising tiers shift from gold to muted rose, then to a pale violet as the sun slips behind the desert's distant ridge. Shadows stretch and blend, no longer sharp but fluid, pooling calmly around blocks, ramps, and scaffolding. The heat loosens its grip at last. Warm stone breathes out the day's stored fire in slow, fading waves. Workers on the upper terraces pause to watch the change. For a brief moment, the world seems to exhale with them. Tools grow quieter, footsteps soften. Voices drop even lower than usual, swallowed by the thickening evening air. Above them, the sky cools into a deepening indigo, the first twilight stars flickering like tiny sparks held in place by some unseen net. This is the hour when the day's final tasks are done. Not heavy lifting or precise alignment, but tending, adjusting, and preparing for tomorrow. A time when work slows into thoughtful gestures. The workers gather in small groups along the terrace edges, sorting through baskets of chips, coiling ropes neatly, and sweeping dust into the narrow gaps between stones. A thin breeze slips across the height of the pyramid, carrying with it the cool scent of desert evening, a mixture of dust settling distant water from the river channels, and the faint aroma of evening fires kindling in the worker village. The breeze moves lightly over the men's skin, and one of them tilts his head back, eyes half closed, and murmurs that even the wind seems relieved, the sun has finally retreated. His companion nods softly and replies that the wind must have been holding its breath all day, waiting for permission to speak. Their quiet humor drifts into the dimming air. Down one terrace, a team finished clearing loose fragments from the day's carving. They scrape limestone dust into baskets, forming small heaps of pale powder. The dust carries a gentle mineral scent, cool in the evening air. A lesser-known detail lingers here. Some of this dust will later be mixed with water to form a thin slurry for smoothing joints between blocks. Nothing goes to waste, even the smallest fragments find purpose. A worker dips his hand into a basket, lifts a handful of dust, and watches it slip between his fingers like falling moonlight. He sighs softly, remarking that the dust seems eager to return to the desert floor. Another worker, arranging wooden wedges nearby, replies that everything on this plateau seems eager to rest tonight. Their soft exchange settles across their tools like a fading echo. Farther along the scaffolded ledge, an overseer moves slowly, checking the final placements of the day. His steps are deliberate, his plumb line dangling gently from his hand. The weight at its end swings lazily in the breeze, no longer needed, but kept close out of habit. He examines the shadows cast by the stones, long, faint, bending slightly with the shifting light. Even at dusk, shadows reveal truths, lines that must remain straight, surfaces that must remain level. A widely accepted detail whispers through this moment. Even the pyramid's smallest adjustments were checked repeatedly, not only at noon, when shadows were short, but also at dusk, when the long, soft shadows could reveal different imperfections. The overseers understand this. Their eyes move across the lines with slow, thoughtful care. Nearby, workers stack unused tools beneath cloths weighted with small stones. They place chisels in wooden trays, wrap mallets in linen, and tie ropes in neat bundles. The movements are slow, almost meditative. The day's fatigue settles into their limbs like warm sand sinking into still water. One man straightens his back with a quiet groan and mutters that his bones feel as old as the stone they've been shaping. Another, folding a strip of linen, replies that at least the bones do not weigh several tons. Their humor, gentle and weary, stirs soft smiles among nearby workers. As the sky deepens further, a thin ribbon of violet stretches across the horizon. The desert begins cooling rapidly. The stones beneath their feet grow firmer, no longer radiating heat. Workers move with more ease now, their breath no longer thick from the afternoon's warmth. The pyramid feels different, not just a structure of mass and geometry, but a living thing settling into night. A faint bird call echoes from far away, a desert night bird beginning its search for insects. The workers glance up briefly at the sound, their expression softened by the hour. A child's voice drifts faintly from the village below, carried upward by the wind, followed by laughter and the clatter of pottery being moved for evening meals. The workers begin descending in small groups. Some choose the wide ramps, where the light still lingers faintly. Others take narrow stairways carved between terrace blocks, stepping carefully to avoid loose chips. The movements are slow but sure, shaped by habit and the knowledge that every stone, every edge, every step has its own intention on this vast structure. Along one of the stairways, a worker pauses to brush dust from his arms. He murmurs that he feels half made of stone by the end of each day. His companion, tightening the knot of his head wrap, replies that stone is loyal. It stays with them no matter how hard they try to leave it behind. Their quiet laughter echoes briefly off the limestone, softened by twilight. At the base of the ramp leading downward, a group halts briefly to look back at the pyramid. In the fading light, the structure rises like a mountain carved from warm dusk, unfinished, stepped, immense. Its sides shimmer faintly where the last sunlight catches the upper casing stones. The workers observe it in silence, not with awe, but with a deep, steady familiarity. This is their daily world, the landscape of their breath and labor. A disputed question lingers gently around them, one they never ask, but future scholars will debate endlessly. How long did it take to reach this height? Years, decades, the evidence whispers different answers. But tonight, the workers measure time not in years, but in shadows lengthening across stone. The first stars appear above. The workers descend the final pathway toward the village. Their sandals leave faint impressions in the cooling sand. Their tools clink softly against their belts. Smoke rises from cooking fires in thin columns. The scent of lentils and warm bread reaches them before they arrive. Behind them, the pyramid settles into the quiet of dusk, massive, warm, and still. And as the last light fades, the day folds into nighttime, slow and calm, like dust settling after a long journey across stone. Night settles across the plateau with a slow, deliberate hush, as though the desert itself exhales every grain of heat it stored through the day. The sky deepens into a soft, endless indigo, pricked with early stars that shimmer faintly over the darkening silhouette of the half-finished pyramid. The air cools in gentle layers, drifting down the terraces, slipping between stone blocks, brushing lightly over the wooden scaffolding that creaks quietly as it adjusts to the cool. In this softened darkness, the pyramid changes once more. Its sharp lines blur slightly. Its steps take on a muted glow, where the last light of dusk still lingers along the highest courses. Lamps flicker faintly across a few terraces, where evening inspections continue, their tiny flames trembling in the breeze like thoughts that have not yet settled into sleep. Workers move through the twilight in unhurried groups, finishing the last tasks of the day. They sweep dust from narrow ledges, collect stray chips, tighten ropes around beams to keep them from shifting overnight. Their footsteps are softer now, cushioned by sand that has cooled beneath the evening sky. Voices murmur low, drifting gently across stone like threads of warm breath. Near the base of the pyramid, a team moves methodically along a row of newly placed blocks. They shine small oil lamps across the seams, testing for gaps that escaped notice in the glare of daylight. The light glints off copper chisels, tucked into belts. Shadows ripple along the stone faces. One worker tilts his lamp and mutters that the stones seem far calmer at night, as if the heat has finally stopped scalding them. Another, checking a corner with slow fingertips, replies softly that everything behaves better when the sun is not watching. Their quiet humor settles warmly between them. A widely accepted historical detail rests quietly in this scene. Construction did continue at dusk and early night, not with heavy tasks, But with finishing touches, measurements, and preparations for dawn, the cool air made careful work easier. The silence deeper, the shadows sharper. Farther up the pyramid, on a high terrace touched only faintly by starlight, an overseer stands with a knotted measuring cord draped across his shoulder. His oil lamp casts a soft circle around his feet, illuminating the pale dust that collects in the creases of the stones. He lowers a plumb line along the edge of a newly placed block. The weight swings gently, tapping the stone with a soft tone before settling. He nods, satisfaction small but present, as though granting the block permission to sleep. A worker nearby rests his hands on a cane-handled mallet and murmurs that the plumb line seems to enjoy its work more than any of them. Another, winding a rope coil, replies that the plumb line never argues, so perhaps it does. Their soft conversation drifts upward, toward the open sky. The night breeze grows slightly cooler. It slips into the half-finished inner passages, stirring tiny spirals of dust that shimmer in the lamplight. Inside, the air feels stiller, quieter, as if the pyramid's core holds its breath when night arrives. Wooden beams expand and contract softly, producing faint clicks. The echo inside the corridors changes, lowering in pitch as the stone calls. Workers leaving the passage brush chalk marks with their fingertips one last time before stepping into the open air. A lesser-known detail hums inside the dark. At night, workers sometimes use thin reeds dipped in oil to trace alignment marks, leaving faint lines visible only by lamplight. These delicate markings will be gone by morning, rubbed out, replaced, or cut away as the stone shifts upward. But tonight, they guide the overseers who walk the terraces like quiet guardians. Outside, the village glows in small pools of firelight. Children's laughter drifts faintly upward, pottery clinks softly, a distant donkey brays once, indignant at the cooling air. The scent of lentils, roasted grain, and baking bread moves gently through the wind, finding its way to the workers still on the pyramid. Teams begin descending slowly. Their sandals leave shallow imprints in the sand that the breeze erases within minutes. The workers move with a kind of slow, collective sigh, tired, but steady, worn, but not defeated. One man, stretching his arms as he walks, murmurs that the stones grow heavier each evening. His companion replies softly that perhaps it is the workers who grow lighter from fatigue. Their quiet amusement fades into the warm hum of night. Some remain on the terraces for a moment longer, gazing back at the rising monument. In the starlight, the pyramid looks immense and gentle at once, a vast shape rising from the desert like a dark, patient mountain. Its upper tiers disappear into the shadows, leaving only suggestion and outline. The workers do not stare with awe, they stare with familiarity, with the quiet pride of people who have shaped their world one stone at a time. A disputed question lingers softly around them, one that future historians will debate endlessly. How close were the ancient workers to understanding the full vision of the pyramid as they built it? Did they sense the monument's final form, or did they simply follow the lines and marks given to them day by day? Here, under starlight, such questions feel distant. The workers understand enough, the pyramid grows, and they grow with it. The breeze strengthens slightly, lifting dust from the terraces and carrying it into the night. The workers descend the last ramp toward the village, shadows stretching long behind them. Oil lamps flicker in doorways, fires crackle. Quiet greetings pass between families. The pyramid stands silent, its stones cooling, its lines firming in the growing night. Lamps on the terraces wink out one by one, until only the stars remain to cast their faint glow across the structure. Night deepens, the workers rest, the desert breathes, and the unfinished pyramid waits in the darkness, calm, immense, and patient, ready for another day of light, dust, and rising stone. The night deepens now, settling over the desert in long, unbroken breaths. The Great Pyramid, warm from the day's labor, cools grain by grain, until every surface softens into darkness. Shadows merge into one another, becoming broad pools of quiet where even the wind seems to tread carefully. The terraces, the ramps, the baskets of tools, all fade into a gentle stillness, touched only by starlight and the faint murmur of distant fires from the village below. The world grows slow, the world grows soft. The last warmth slips from the stones like a sigh leaving tired lungs. Sand calls beneath the falling night, embracing each footprint, each trace of work, and smoothing them away as though preparing the plateau for sleep. The lingering scent of dust mingles with the faint sweetness of desert air. Even the breeze moves with quiet purpose now, gliding down the sides of the monument in calm, steady waves. Somewhere far below, a child laughs once, the sound drifting upward like a small lantern floating in the dark, warm, brief, and gentle. The fires in the village settle into glowing embers. Pottery is stacked, lamps are dimmed, linen rustles as families settle onto their mats. Soft voices fade, then softer still, until only breath remains. Above it all, the pyramid stands patient and silent, its unfinished peak dissolving into the stars. The workers will return tomorrow. The dust will rise again, the chisels will tap, the ropes will tighten, but for now, only stillness. Let your thoughts settle the way dust settles after a long day, slowly, lightly, without effort. Feel the quiet gather around you like cool linen. Feel your breath deepen with the night. The stones rest, the workers rest, you may rest too.